I am just absolutely floored that I haven't heard this phrase in relation to Valorant. Like, this advantage is potentially the best thing I have shared with all of you up until this point. This is a modification that can be made to any attack that I know of. It's super difficult to predict, and with a little bit of setup, it can create situations where the opponents are just doing all of the wrong things, leading to an easy win for your team. Plus, it makes players more dynamic and intentional and just better overall. So I'm super excited to be able to share this with all of you. As per usual, the first 10 people to head to the description down below will be able to join the Atchak's Discord server. Hope to see you there. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be the first to see more content designed to help you rank up just like this. Keep in mind that these tips did work for me, but you may need something different. That is up to your own judgment. Hello everyone, my name is Atchax, and let's get started. So take a look at the distance that the defenders would have to move if they want to travel from A to B. And then compare that to the distance that the attackers would have to move if they wanted to rotate from A to B through the safe route or through the standard route. There's a pretty big difference in the distances right there. The defenders have a much shorter route. So now we have to ask ourselves the question, why does this matter for the attackers? Why would this be an advantage for the defenders? Well, the answer is teams in Valorant, characters in Valorant, move at the same speed. And so if one team has to move a farther distance, they will lose a race if both teams start at the same time. And this feeds into the issue that many attackers face, where they'll attack a site, they'll get blocked, and then they'll rotate to the other site, and the defenders will already be there. They'll attack that site, they'll get blocked, they'll rotate again, the defenders will already be there. And they're playing this kind of losing ping pong game, and they're losing because the defenders are able to get there more quickly because they have less distance to move. But this race is only unfairly sided towards the defenders if both teams start at the same place. And this is where tempo advantage comes in. If the attackers can get up to a point like here, where they will be able to start earlier in the race, if they're able to get to this point before the defenders leave, they will be in a winning position for the race. And so originally it seemed as if this constraint of characters moving at the same speed was a major advantage for the defenders, but actually it's a major advantage for the attackers. And the reason for this is the attackers can attack a site, fail, and then reset and hit something else later. The defenders can't afford to do that. If they make a mistake, they're going to lose one of the sites. The other question that needs to be asked is, why does this approach of taking a tempo advantage and starting earlier actually work? Let's break that down. So the attackers make a threat towards A. And because the defenders don't want to lose A, they will attempt to counter that move by rotating their players from B to A. Now, in this case, what a lot of players do is they try to look for an opening. They might get smoked off, and there's going to be util, as defenders usually do. It's going to stop them from pushing in. They'll be delayed, and then the attackers will wait around until the smoke clears or until they realize that they can't get in, and then they will rotate. And by this point, it's often too late. That's why we see the ping pong match that I was describing earlier, of the attackers bouncing back and forth in between the sites and the defenders always beating them, because they're waiting for the defenders to block them off, and then they're not taking advantage of that opportunity. So instead of waiting around, the attackers can rotate out. They can rotate out early before the defenders really have a chance, before the smoke disappears. They're not waiting for that opportunity to hit on A again. They're already deciding to move towards the B side of the map. And so the attackers are going to be making this move, but the defenders are now going to be countering. As you can see, they're moving their forces towards A while the attackers are moving towards the B side of the map. The defenders are now countering a move that the attackers are not making. And that is the heart of the tempo advantages. The tempo advantage hinges on two ideas. The first is that different actions have different counters. The same thing will not counter a rush, a default, and a split. They all have very different counters. Further, different points in these overall attacking strategies are going to require different counters by the defenders. And this can be really basic stuff. Think something as simple as if there's a B rush, the defenders want to shift all of their players over to B as quickly as possible. Whereas if the attackers were running a default, if the defenders shift all their players over to B immediately, that's going to give the attackers an opening on A, and that would actually be a mistake. So different actions require different counters. The second idea is that these big overall attacks can be divided into steps, smaller steps, based on what the counter is. So when the counter that the defenders are supposed to be running to beat the attackers changes, that's when the step also changes. And examining that point where a step changes is really where we can tie these two ideas together. Changes in steps tend to take place at certain timings. By default, these timings are sort of a standard across the game, usually the fastest possible execution of an attack. For example, there is a certain period of time right at the start of the round where you wouldn't expect to see an attacker in defender spawn unless you saw an omen teleport or something like that. And this makes sense because it actually takes some amount of time to physically move from one of the attacker barrier locations to the defender spawn. And so expecting an attacker to be there before they physically could possibly move that distance might be fairly unreasonable. There is nothing wrong with using these default timings. However, it might be better to use timings that you set yourself, simply because you can't always depend on your opponents to have a good sense of the default timings, and also because you can set up timings that you actually like better, rather than using default timings that you might not like. You can set these timings yourself through previous rounds, through Precedent. When you performed a certain attack on the defense for the first time, the defense did not know exactly what was coming. There were probably characteristics of that attack that could be associated with the attack itself. For example, a Sova Dart into B, followed by a hit on B. Or maybe a loud Cypher Cam into Garage, followed by some kind of Garage attack. You can feed the opponents one of these cues in order to make them expect a certain action when in reality you're doing a different action. That's one of the ways that setting timings by Precedent gives you a few more options. Let's bring it back to tempo advantage. Remember, tempo advantage is designed to make the opponents counter an action that you're not actually doing. So think about timings, think about counters, and let's consider what happens if you hit a step earlier, either by cutting out a step like we did in the introduction example, or by making a tempo shift and accelerating an attack. With this, you can get under the defense by making a move before the correct counter is deployed. If you hit later, either by delaying a step or deaccelerating an attack, you can make a move after the counter that beats your move is deployed. And in this way, you are making the defense swing and miss so that you can land a heavy counterpunch while they are off balance. That's one of the things that makes the tempo advantage so incredibly powerful. You can take a defense that might be able to shut down a lot of the things that you can throw at it, and you can then create a weakness and then hit that weakness. It puts a lot of pressure on the defenders to get things exactly right so that they don't lose the round. Since I kicked off the video with an example of a faster tempo moving one step ahead, I'm going to close out the video with the other side of the coin, and that is an attack that slows down. So let's get right into that. This is one of my absolute favorite attacks because it's very simple, it's powerful, it's second depth, and it relies on a tempo advantage. So this is a standard 2-1-2 defense against an attacking team who is going to be stacking up outside of B Garage. If you move up the ranks, eventually you're going to hit a point where the defense is going to start trying to block out some of your preferred strategies. For example, if you've rushed a bunch of times and a half, the defense is going to try to block those attacks out by pre-firing with utility. So for example, a molly and a smoke right at the start of the round before they've even seen a rush. And while this might stop you from rushing, it actually sets up an opportunity here to use a tempo advantage to get an easy win. You see, especially if these smokes are on cooldown or if the molly is only one, if the defenders only have one molly to work with, once they use this utility, they're not going to have anything for a delayed hit. So the attackers are going to move up through B main completely silently, as the defenders have already smoked and mollied. And they're just going to wait. They're just going to wait for these things to disappear. And as soon as they do, that is their cue to attack with their own smokes, and then to just rush as if it were the opening of the game. And so by not giving themselves away, they're not showing a situation where the defense needs to shift over to B so they can hit with the strength of a rush, yet at the same time, they don't have to deal with the counters that would stop a rush. And so that's why the delayed rush is so incredibly powerful. A lot of situations, the defenders only have one molly per site to work with, or their number of smokes they have is limited, or they're on cooldown after they use them. And so jumping into the site in that window of opportunity is fantastic. And on top of that, a lot of the times the defense is going to let its guard down because they're going to see, oh, look, there's no one at B. We already hard countered the rush. That's their main attack that we've seen so far. So we're safe. And they really aren't, because in that moment of lapse of concentration, that's when you strike and make a very, very strong attack that is very hard to block. Even more so now that the defense does not have the counter to it. And so that's how the tempo advantage can be used to create an attack that the defense really doesn't have an answer for. The tempo advantage is a modification to an attack that plays into defender expectations in order to make that attack much, much stronger. The tricky part is understanding why the tempo advantage works. I put a lot of emphasis on this because it is very important in being able to use it effectively against the different opponents that you will come across in matchmaking. If you have a good handle on that, you are in a very good spot. Once you have the Y down, actually doing the tempo advantage is simple. In fact, it's so simple that I dramatically underestimated its strength when I first started using it. Any strategy that can consistently put a player in situations where the opponents are out of position and not paying attention with the wrong utility is of course going to be extremely strong. Also, I think it's important to consider how many more ways to score you've just learned in a little over 10 minutes, because it's sort of incredible. By default, strategies are learned one at a time, slowly building up a library. But now, you can divide every strategy in your entire library into steps and accelerate or deaccelerate at virtually any point. Some people might have doubled the number of ways they can score, some tripled, some multiplied by 10, some even more. With that kind of value, it might be worth it to subscribe. After all, it's free. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have an amazing day.